And it's going to be like so busy. People will still be wandering in and out that after.
Okay, I'd like to get started today. So, welcome to today's Letters and Arts event with novelist Andrew Pyper. Just a couple things to start. I want to ask you to please be sure to have your devices set so they don't go off during the hour. It's kind of embarrassing. Also, more importantly, our long-running series of presenting the finest in Canadian writing is possible with the generous support of Canada Council for the Arts, the London Arts Council, and our own college, Fanshawe College. And we're very grateful for their support. And, today, I also want to acknowledge the work of my predecessor in organizing this series, Ingrid Hutchison, who's sitting close to the front. And to welcome, as always, our bookstore representative, Wendy DeBoers, here with a selection of Andrew's books, and I'm sure Andrew will be happy to sign any copies at the end of the reading. And I want to note just quickly one thing as well. If you've seen on the slide here, there's a fairly exciting event. If you like this kind of stuff, in our city this weekend, wordfest.ca, check it out. And if you like graphic writing, maybe, I don't know, it's a great chance to see the great graphic novelist Joe Sacco, unusual in London, Ontario. A few words about today's guest, Andrew Pyper. Andrew grew up in Stratford, and he's now become a creator of best-selling, award-winning, film-optioned psychological thrillers. Books that dwell in the supernatural. Books that seem to strike a chord with people because we see them, for example, on bestseller lists, New York Times, Globe and Mail. We see his books listed as best books of the year, and we also see them in the news when they're optioned by film studios. Andrew's page turners, as my colleague, Professor Senior, says, are creepy as all hell. And as usual, she's dead on. Certain characters in Andrew's recent book, The Demonologist, seem to actually reside in hell. And Lost Girls, this book here, I can testify is massively creepy. I was reading it this summer just before heading up north to this little town just north of Lake Superior, coincidentally where the book is set. And I got halfway through the book, and there's this scene where the main character says, he calls home and said, "I'm scared." And I was halfway through the book, and I'm thinking, I'm going there. I'm scared too. I am not going to read the rest of this book until I get home. And that's true, that's what I did. And I gotta say, that's effective writing. That's effective writing, and that's what Andrew brings to us today. So it's with this peculiar sense of hope for fun and dread that we take from all that's creepy that I ask you to welcome Andrew Pyper.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me here today. It's truly a pleasure to be here. And it's the timing, I think, is right, given the kind of things that I write, given that it's almost Halloween, right? So I thought, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I thought I would read a very short, sort of standalone set piece from The Demonologist that is, it's not comedy, let's just put it that way. It's not a laugh a minute. But just to sort of set up what the Demonologist is about, and then what I thought we would do with the time we have together this afternoon is talk a little bit about this particular book, and as I mentioned, read a little bit from the book, and then hopefully we will have time at the end for any questions you might have about really kind of any aspect of of this racket of writing or reading or publishing or movie making of books. And I don't know if I'll have the answer, but I'll endeavor to give you one. So the demonologist is really born out of my interest in writing a horror novel where, oh, that's better, right? Writing a horror novel that made emotional sense. So I'm a big horror fan. I love reading horror novels. Still go to watch horror movies, but so often they make no emotional sense, right? The meeting of the evil thing and the protagonist is basically just bad luck, right? People move to London, Ontario. They are from out of town. They buy a suspiciously cheap house. It's like, oh, it's great, honey. They buy it. They move in. Like, why did it only cost $25,000? And they find out when people start sort of ripping them apart in the night and blood comes down the wall. The problem with those narratives is that typically they're a narrative of escape, right? It's just like, how do they get out of the house? Which is usually pretty simple to answer, just leave. There's always a point in a horror movie where you want to yell at the screen, just go. Yeah. Go to the Holiday Inn. And they stay, or they sort of like, they go back for the dog, or they make stupid decisions. So the horror movies often turn on stupidity. And so I didn't want my novel to be about that. I wanted it to make coherent sense emotionally as well. So I thought I would create a protagonist who, there's a reason why the demonic visits his life. And when you read about demonology through the centuries, what's interesting, what I came to discover is that no matter what major world religion you look at, Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, you name it, they all have different heads, as it were. They all have different, whether it's a prophet or a god or multiple gods. But one thing that they all have in common is the demonic. All world religions have some version of demons in them. And I was reading this one book at one point, sort of a scholarly book about demons, and this sentence jumped out at me when he made this observation, and then the theologian said, the reason that is true is that because demons are real. They have always been with us. They have always been our companions. And they typically find a way into our lives, again, whether you believe that they're real or not. The mythology would suggest that they find a way into our lives when there's a break in our lives, an emotional reason, divorce, grief, the loss of a loved one, depression. Since early times, they didn't call it depression in the 12th century, but they would call it melancholy. Sadness is a way in for evil and for the demonic. So my character is a professor of English. He teaches at Columbia University in New York. He is a melancholic, or what we would again call a depressive. He teaches Paradise Lost, which is John Milton's epic poem about the fall of angels from heaven and the establishment of hell. He doesn't believe any of that, of course, right? He doesn't believe that there's such a thing as angels or demons or God or heaven or hell. He just teaches it, right? Like all teachers, they don't really believe in what they're teaching. You convincingly make a case as though you might. But he's someone who has a daughter. The only person he can really connect to in his life is his daughter. He has a failing marriage. His daughter Tess is 12. And one day, after he teaches the last lecture of his term, he's approached by a mysterious woman who's weirdly, mysteriously, worryingly thin, who doesn't give her name, and she has a proposal for David. The proposal is to travel to Venice and there go to an address and observe what she'll only call a phenomenon. That's all she says. And he assumes that she's crazy, strange, dismisses her, and goes home to find that his wife announces to him that she's leaving him. And not just leaving him, which is bad enough. If you've ever been left by someone, it's like, then you find out who. It's like, okay, who is it? And in this case, it's a physicist, which again, for a professor of English, is like a double whammy. It's unforgivable to be left for a guy of science. And it's like, couldn't you have picked a playwright? A poet, at least. No, it's a physicist. So David's life is ruptured, and he decides, you know what? I am going to take up that woman who came to see me after hours in my faculty room, and I am going to go to Venice because the check The check is good, the money's good. And he brings his daughter Tess with him to Venice. And there he does go to this address that she gave to him, and there encounters something very terrifying, something that's real, something that can only be explained by means of the supernatural. So David is terrified. He goes to the hotel where his daughter is staying with the intent of collecting her and going straight to the airport and getting the hell out of, so to speak, getting the hell out of Venice. And he discovers that his daughter is not in the hotel room. He searches desperately for her and finds her on the rooftop of his hotel, where she's standing on the edge of the rooftop that overlooks the Grand Canal in Venice. And there he's addressed by his dead father's voice speaking through his daughter, saying something that only he and his dead father could possibly know. And then she falls into the Grand Canal, and her body is never found. It's a presumed suicide, but David comes to convince upon his return back to New York that his daughter is not in fact entirely dead, nor entirely alive, that she is in the possession of a demon from Paradise Lost, this poem that he has taught his whole life, that is presumed to not be real, but is increasingly, in his view, maybe a lot more real than he ever thought. So he goes in search of his daughter by way of trying to search for the demon that he thinks has her. It's, in a weird way, it's kind of like CSI or a profiling. You know how criminal profiles try to find the bad guy by profiling their characteristics and their motivations. In a way, the demonologist is kind of structured in that way, except in this case, it's someone who's trying to profile a figure who can't possibly be real, at least we think. And he sort of crisscrosses North America and goes to places. Now, if you were going to come to, let's say, London, and you were looking for a demon, just say it. Maybe why you're all here today. What would you do? Like, how would you sort of go about that? I mean, typically possessed people don't sort of come up and, well, maybe they do. I was downtown on Dundas Street today. There were some obviously possessed people there. Quite clearly, they might as well just be like, had a t-shirt, like, possessed. But if you were trying to look for a demon, how would you look for one? And I think what you would do is go to the local paper and look not on the front page but at the back, right, where all the weird stories are. The sort of guy who lives with 20 snakes is eaten by his own python. Like those kind of weird stories. That's where you'd probably go to look. And David is doing precisely that and getting closer and closer. At least he thinks he's getting closer and closer to the demon that has his daughter. And he ends up in North Dakota, where the story at the back of the local paper involves the Reese twins. Now this is the part I'm going to read from. So there's a couple details here you gotta remember. The Reese girls, as they're called, are elderly identical twins, totally identical. There's Paula and Delia. Paula recently, according to the newspaper report, went down into the cellar. They live alone on this farmhouse outside of town. Delia went down into the cellar after hearing voices, the voices of the dead. Delia never heard them. Paula went down into the cellar one day and never came back up. And her body is not found. So Delia, of course, is the person of interest in the case, but there's no evidence to suggest that she had anything to do with it. So David goes to the farmhouse. Yes?
If one of her is sick, is he voices inside her that mean that she could feel?
She hears the voice. It's unclear whether she hears the voices, literally, or whether they are figments in her mind. That's something that not her sister nor David know for sure. So he goes to the door, knocks on the door is opened by an elderly woman, and now remember again, one last time, Paula has gone down into the cellar, and Delia is the surviving twin. Paula Reese, she says, offering her hand. It's only when I take it that the significance of the name strikes me. Paula, I thought you were lost. I was, but I'm found now, aren't I? What happened to you? She traces the rim of the coffee cup with a finger. I don't properly know. Isn't that something, she says, and answers herself with a short blast of laughter. All I remember is walking in that screen door this morning and Delia sitting right in that seat there, the one you're leaning on, drinking coffee from this very cup, and the two of us hugging and Delia making me eggs like not a thing had passed between us. That's Delia's cup? Mm-hmm. It's empty. She finished it. But it looks untouched. She looks into the cup's bottom, then back at me. So it does, she says. Are you all right? She doesn't appear to hear the question. Do you have a sister, Mr. Ullman? She asks. No, I had a brother, though, when I was young. Well, then you'd know the place kin like that keep in your heart. There's no scrubbing out that kind of stain, is there? She shakes her head. Blood runs deep. At the mention of blood, I notice for the first time the spots on the woman's most exterior sweater, a cardigan with the pockets hanging off, a fine spatter around her middle, along with crumbs of earth, field dirt, smudges here and there on her clothes and under her nails. The voices you heard, I say, the ones that called you down to the cellar, what did they say? She ponders this, a brow scrunched to search of what seems a distant past, as though I've asked her the name of the boy who sat next to her in kindergarten. It's a funny thing, she answers, finally. But though I know it was words, I can't recall them as words. More like a feeling, you know? A sound that put a feeling inside you. Could you describe it? I asked. An awful thing. You'd rather be doubled over sick. You'd rather drive a nail through the back of your own hand. Because it was painful. Because it opened you up from the inside out. Made things so clear they were cast in pure darkness instead of light. A darkness you could see better than any light. Where's Delia now, Paula? She went down to the cellar just before you came. The cellar? She said she had to straighten something out, now that I'd come home and all. Do you mind if I go down and have a word with her? Be my guest. Not that I'll be joining you. Why not? Because I'm afraid. She looks at me like I'm dense. Aren't you? I don't answer that. Just move away from the table to the closed door I somehow know opens not onto a closet or pantry or back stairwell up to the second floor, but down into the broad hole beneath the house. Paula watches me grasp the handle and turn it. The sensation of her eyes on my back pushing me forward to stand at the top of the stairs. Her fingers stroking the ring of the coffee cup faster now, so that the ceramic issues a wavering note of warning. A light switch turns on a pair of bulbs below, though I can't see them yet from this height, only the two yellow aprons they cast upon the concrete floor. And then, halfway down the stairs, the one to the left goes out. Not the pop that comes from burnout, but the fizzle of being too loosely screwed into the socket. I could walk over through the dark and fix it with a single turn. Yet that's a less inviting prospect than keeping my eye on the remaining circle of warmth to the right. When my feet make it to the floor, I can take in some of the details the light offers. Work tables against the walls, antique paint cans stacked in teetering towers, paper yard waste bags piled in the far corner, their bottoms black from their slowly liquefying contents. It is these bags that emit the smell, a decidedly organic rot, pervasive and strong, the back of the throat tickle of burnt sugar icing. No Delia to be found. She could be in the dark to the left, but even if she sat on the floor knitting socks, I wouldn't be able to see her. Only now does it occur to me that prior to my turning on the light switch, she would have been in total darkness herself, if she's down here at all. What was I thinking? Trusting an old lady dirtied with blood and soil who had just returned from a 10-day sojourn without knowing how she'd spent the time. An old woman with a gift for hearing things the rest of the world prays to never hear. A liar, because no coffee had touched that cup this morning. There was no smell of it in the kitchen either, no pot on the stove. Paula is probably closing the door at the top of the stairs right now. Wasn't there a latch on the outside, silvery and new? She must be slipping the padlock through, even as I back up and make the bottom step, clicking it shut. Over here, a voice like Paula's, but not Paula's, stops me. Lets me see that the door at the top of the cellar stairs remains half open just as I left it. As I turn, there is a metallic scrape along the floor, and there she is, Delia Reese, pulling an overturned wash tub into the range of light and sitting on its edge with a weary sigh. "Good morning," I say. "Morning, is it? You take the sun away and you lose track of time down here. You didn't turn the lights on. You live in a place long enough, and I suppose some things you can see just fine in the dark." At first I'd taken her slouch and hooded eyes for fatigue, the posture that follows the completion of some physical task. Yet with this last sentence, it strikes me that I'm wrong. Despite her friendliness, her words are hollowed out by an immeasurable sadness, reedy and thin. I know because it's how I hear my own voice now, too. "My name is David Ullman. I heard," she interrupts, lifting her eyes to the ceiling. "Half heard. You must be delighted about Paula." She returns her eyes to me. "Are you real?" "As far as I can tell. What have you done?" "I'm sorry, I'm not sure that... If you're here, you must have..." She lets the thought drift away, rubs her shoulders. "This was always a cold house," she said. "Even in the summer it never warmed up, never got all the way into the corners. Like the rooms themselves hated being touched by the sun." She appears as though she's about to stand, then changes her mind. A mind that's been transported to a particular sliver of the past. "Me and Paula, always going around in long coats in August," she says, "and scarves around our ears on Christmas morning." "A good thing you had each other out here," I say. "Maybe so. Or maybe there's such a thing as being too close to somebody." "How's that?" "Twins. You can lose grasp of what's what in a cold house for 60 years, and just another you to talk to, another you to look at." I take a step closer. It's what she seems to require, a hand on her elbow to help her to her feet. Yet at my approach, she lifts a finger to stop me. There's the curious feeling that she wants not only to finish her thought, but prevent me from coming too close. "I prayed to heaven to take her away," she said. "It's a shameful thing, but it's true. Since I was a girl, I've had days when I wished for my sister to get her arm caught in the thresher, or fall asleep at the wheel, or get a chunk of stew caught in her throat and not find the air to spit it out. I could see the ways it might happen. So simple. Terrible things to wish for. But all of it seeming perfectly natural. Accidents." She's crying now, a messy sound that remains separate from her voice, so that it's like she's performing an act of self-ventriloquism. "Why would you wish for an accident?" "So I could be alone for once. Not one half of a whole, not what folks called us all our lives, not the terrible twosome or the Reese twins or the girls, just myself." She swallows, but she goes on without clearing her throat so that her voice is even quieter. "I prayed, but heaven never did a thing. So then I started praying the other way. And this time, something answered." "We should go now," I said. "Go? Why?" "Your sister came home, remember?" "I killed my sister." "No, Delia, she's okay." The old woman shakes her head. "I killed her. But I was just talking to her upstairs. Paula's not missing anymore. She's here." "That thing? That's not Paula." "Who is it?" "The one who answered my prayer." The old woman lifts her hand to point at a place over my shoulder in the darkness behind me. I turn from her and move forward with my own shadow cast ahead of me as another layer of dark. I keep my hands raised so they might catch hold of the other bulb string hanging down from its switch. Just when it feels like I've gone too far, it tickles over my cheeks. My fingers follow it up to the bulb, screw it in tight. The heat tells me it's back on before the revelation of its light. The sisters sit side by side in the corner, their backs against the far wall at the edge of the light's reach, so that their faces are illuminated, but only dimly so. It is enough to see that they are real, that the shotgun lying across Delia's lap, the dark, fresh wet against the bricks from the exit wound at the back of her head, the gaping mouth from where the barrel had been placed, is real. That Paula's remains, speckled from the dirt that clings to her, the root ends and pebbles from the ground she'd been dug up from, is real. Why did you bring her here? I asked Delia, who now sits rubbing a knuckle under her glistening, running nose. It asked me to. Tell me its name. It doesn't have one. It told you to do it. It told me I could. Now it's the other bulb's turn to flicker and extinguish. The Delia I have been speaking to returns to darkness. You know, you'll kill too, don't you? She said, much closer now. That's what it wants. For you to know what it does. To show how you can do it too. For you to believe. The old woman is so close I can read the outline of her face inches from mine, even in the darkness. The stained ivory of her smile. Someone close, she whispers. I step backward and start up the stairs, slowly at first, making sure of my footing on the narrow steps, then running for the top, my breath a labored heave in my own ears. Bounding through the kitchen, the single coffee cup still there, the chair empty, and out the door to my car. I peel out of the farmhouse's yard and gun it down the lane to the road, slapping at the wheel to make the turn and knocking against the Reese mailbox post with my bumper as I go. The mailbox pops its door open, so that when I glance back at it a couple 100 yards on, it looks like a stooped figure lurching after me, its mouth wide in a scream. Okay. Thank you. I'll stop there. And oh good, okay, so we have, plenty of time for questions. I wanted to make that part short just in case I didn't want to run out of time, because I always think that in gatherings like this with people from different interests and different courses of study, etc., that just talking about this process of making stuff up for a living can be the most interesting part. But does anyone have any questions? Yes?
Yes, how do you relate your stories to topics like psychology, for example?
The question is how do I relate stories for ideas to ideas, to in this case, psychology or themes of that kind? Is that the question, more or less?
Well, psychology, anthropology, and sociology.
Right. Well, I think I would say, ideas do a lot of that heavy lifting for you, right? I mean, that is to say, when you think about, there's various preoccupations that we all have as a society at a given time. So, for example, when I was working on the book that I'm working on now, it's born out of a lot of sort of concerns in a particular moment in time. So, heaven. Have you noticed there's a lot of like books and people who have claimed to like return from heaven, and books like Proof of Heaven. My dog came back from heaven. I bought some real estate in heaven. I mean, there's a heaven preoccupation on at the moment, which fascinates me, not necessarily in the sense that because I think particular people have gone and returned from heaven and can report on what it looks like and stuff, but rather there's something about our world that is giving rise to a lot of talk about heaven. Like maybe that the boomers are finally, getting older and they're frightened and they're looking death in the face and they're like, heaven, let's bring heaven back. Like not only are they not letting go of their jobs, they aren't even going to die. But it may be, so it may be generational, it may be demographic in the way, it could be spiritual, I don't know, or it could be actual, right? It could be like, no, heaven's real. But that jumping off point, that observation, that social observation, is a way for me to move into a story, a fiction. So in my case, I started reading a lot about near-death experience and people who claim to have died, technically, medically died for a period of time and come back. And And then from there you can start to sort of what if, right? You just, before you start writing anything, I always sort of just start riffing on, well, what if this is a story about someone who, you know, died and came back, but brought something back with him? Instead of just like, hey, I'm back and I have the story to tell, it's like, I came back and I brought someone with me. Someone who I wished I hadn't brought with me. And what if that person has to die a second time to prevent that thing that he brought back with him from the other side from hurting the people he loves? What if, in other words, what if near-death experience has a consequence far darker than, I saw heaven and my dog was there? So that's a long way of sort of answering your question so far as like, it can start from like, you know, a sociological or anthropological topic, but that is not necessarily a direct route to fiction. It's usually, the better question is, why are we concerned about that particular thing now? And how can fiction maybe illustrate or explore that, in the case of horror fiction or scary fiction, that social anxiety? What's making us scared right now? There has to be a reason that The Walking Dead is the most popular cable show, you know, in the history of cable television. It's not necessarily that it's all that well made. It's reasonably well made, it's reasonably well written, but it's because it speaks to us right now. The idea of contagion, the idea of disease, the idea of I think, losing our souls to screens and virtual reality. You know, all those things give rise to zombies. Not necessarily in the actual sense, but metaphorically speaking. So in that case, we don't start necessarily from zombies as an anthropological case study, but rather zombies as an embodiment of our social anxieties of the moment. Yes? Yes?
What writers influenced you to become a writer yourself?
Well, I mean, there's a number. You know, I as a reader, I've always and continue to read all over the place. I've never, and I encourage you all to not feel obliged to read a particular kind of book, whether it's so-called serious literary fiction or whether, you know, you feel ashamed because it's like, you know, a graphic novel or you know, erotica or whatever. I mean, just, you know, read. I think we sometimes can forget. And you know, certainly in my experience at university, you know, the idea of pleasure was never even mentioned. The idea of like, this book should be pleasurable. And it's a bit like sort of like, you know, having a sex life. It's like, okay, so this is how you do it. Okay, no, put that over there. And it's like, but this isn't fun. I thought it was supposed to. I was told it was fun. It's like, no. Here it's not fun. We've overcome fun. We're at a place beyond fun. So I think, you know, for me, it's like whatever is in front of me at a given time. Like, that looks interesting. So I remember as a kid reading all of Graham Greene, who writes, you know, sort of basic, well, I wouldn't say invented the spy novel, but maybe perfected the spy novel, and as well as Stephen King. And then on the other hand, I, you know, have read every book that Alice Munro has published. And I remember an early reviewer actually memorably, and I think perfectly, described my work as, or described me as the secret love child of Alice Munro and Stephen King. And I thought, yes, you know, that's my goal. You know, I don't know if that's true, but I would love to be the literary child of Alice Munro and Stephen King. And I don't see it personally. I don't see a disjunction between those two projects. There's a lot of gothic, there's a lot of horror in Alice Munro, and similarly, there's a lot of character study and nuance in the best of Stephen King too. So everything that comes my way gets sort of churned into and digested and can be called an influence, really. Next to you.
So, as a writer, what's your process of going through things, and what's the hardest part when you start to write a novel?
Well, once you start a novel, I think you know, middles are tough. You know, they're right up there with beginnings and endings. I think the hardest part really is an idea, and by idea I don't just mean like, okay, I got it. You know, I think we all have woken up and had an idea for a novel or an idea for a movie. Like, this would make a great movie. And whenever I travel or go anywhere, and, you know, you're waiting in an airport waiting room or whatever, and someone asks, "Oh, what do you do?" And I hate answering that question because people sometimes think what I do is interesting, and then they want to talk to me. So I'll say, okay, you know, and it's like I try to lie and say, no, okay, I write posts. And invariably, here we go, here it comes, 3, 2, 1, I've got a great idea for a novel. And I go, okay. And then I'll say, you know, well, tell me what it is. And then it'll invariably be some version like, so it's about a guy who, he, and then it's like, it's you, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's me. It's me because I'm so interesting. So, but where I'm going is that they don't really have an idea for a novel because they'll sort of say it's about a guy and then he robs a bank and he gets out of there, except he's blind. That's the twist. He's a blind bank robber. And you're like, okay, you got a blind bank robber. Then what happens? I don't know. Like it's just then like stuff happens, and at the end he gets shot in the eye. And you're like, okay, that's not a novel actually. That's I don't know. I don't even know what that is. That's two things you could put on like the back of a chocolate bar wrapper. But it takes a whole number of ideas to create an idea for a book. It takes about 15,000 little micro ideas that cohere into an idea for a novel, and that's the hardest part because you can sometimes get you see that the lure of a mirage. Oh, this topic, this would be interesting, and then when you get there, you realize there's nothing there. And so, conversely, the most exciting part is when you do kind of cobble together all these little ideas and all those what ifs, like what if it's no, what if it's no, what if, and you bring the whole thing together, and you realize this is a novel. This is also the novel I want to write. And I'm a big outliner, and so I'm obsessed with that, and I sort of outline the whole thing and put it on my office wall. And when I don't start the book until I can look at that outline and bring someone if we have people over for dinner or drinks or to watch the hockey game before the hockey game, I'll go, okay, I want to show you something. And I bring them up to my office and I'll go, just bear with me here, and just sort of tell them the whole story. And if I don't get, it's almost like a sort of a focus group, if I don't get a reaction that is some version of like, that's cool, I know that even if I write the thing, it's not going to work. I mean, if people aren't sort of like, what you just said, that's really cool, I'd love to read that, then I've got a problem. So that's the hardest and the most exciting part, is really truly devising a convincing and exciting idea for a novel that will sustain you over the course of the writing of the thing. Because a lot of ideas, I think my theory is that a lot of novels that are started and abandoned in the middle aren't necessarily because they're bad or because the person writing them is bad. It's that they were started too early. You got into it too early and you're like, oh, I'm starting to hate this thing and these people are boring and I don't know where it goes from here. And you could have avoided all that maybe if you'd sort of thought about it a bit more. I think one more analogy. I think the case I make for outlining is a lot like dating. I think you don't. Well, maybe some idiot might, but you don't sort of marry someone you meet like online, right? So I've seen you. I've seen your profile. Let's get married. Hopefully, what precedes that, but maybe I don't know. It's 2014. I'm out of it. But hopefully, you'd like to physically meet them. Perhaps go out a few times, get to know each other, and then perhaps make some kind of larger commitment. But you shouldn't sort of, I think sort of starting a novel when you're like, I have an idea for a novel. The blind guy went into the bank. It's like, too early, the blind guy at the bank. You should have thought about that a little more. Yes?
I'm just wondering how you arrived at the concept of emotional sense, and then once you had an idea of what you wanted, if you tried to find it somewhere else, like if you looked for other examples of works that went with this instead of following generic conventions, or if you just sort of set out?
Well, in this case, Milton's poem Paradise Lost really had a couple of answers for me. One was the idea of I didn't even know who my villain was going to be. I sort of started off initially as thinking about maybe a monster story, some kind of monster from mythology. And it was only when I started thinking about demons more and then rereading Milton's poem that I thought, yes, A, demons, and B, the way that Milton portrays his Satan as a sympathetic figure, someone who is not, a demon of the, Hollywood just sort of gnashing, puking, eye-gouging variety, but an intelligent, articulate, emotionally understandable figure. When you think about Satan from the Milton sense, he's someone who was kicked out. He was the favorite son, right? He was the most talented. He was had the most promise, and he got a little too pushy with Dad. And Dad, Milton's God is a really kind of cantankerous, impatient guy. He was like, okay, look, there was no time out. It was just like, you're going to hell. And so he kicks him out. Satan now lives in the basement. You know, if you've ever lived in a basement apartment, like they smell funny, the windows are too small, and he's lost all of his friends. The only people he gets to hang out with are these like minor demons who are kind of losers, like just loser friends. So he's this really talented guy who lives in the basement with loser friends. I've been there, but you're sympathetic to this guy, and he's sort of like, you know what really burns me? It's not so much the dad kicked me out. It's that now he loves mankind. These, Adam and Eve. And all, why they're his favorites? I'm gonna fuck them up. And so it completely is a coherent, emotionally understandable arc. And so I thought, yes, that was sort of one of the eureka moments in the conception book, that not only will my character be someone who suffers from depression and loses the one thing, his daughter, that makes sense of life for him, but that the demon in my story will also be emotionally motivated. He will be someone who is similarly alone. This is a novel that really is about not just grief, but solitude and the particular pain of being alone. And David seeks it out by trying to regain his daughter. And in a way, the villain, the demon, seeks to make us alone. That's the equipment, that's his particular talent, that's his goal, is to make us alone. Because when we're alone is when we're at our weakest as people. So that's, I hope that answers your question, but there's a way to, invest not just one's protagonist, but one's villain with an emotional understanding that can go beyond just, I'm going to kill you. Yes?
Yeah. I'm just wondering how involved you are with your books being turned into movies, and if you get a chance to say what happens with the screenplay, or if you get a hand in writing them.
No.
You don't get any of that?
No. Well, it depends on who you are. J.K. Rowling, I think, has a pretty active role.
Yeah. Gillian Flynn with her Gone Girl.
And Gillian Flynn. I'm in neither of those positions. Typically Hollywood, if you're in a position of them, buying your book, they give you an option fee, which is really an F-off fee. It's just sort of go away. Like, are you interested in this deal? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, we'll never, go away. Yeah. Because there's a real prejudice, I think, in Hollywood that, novelists will just mess it up. We understand how to make a movie. And I guess there's a point to it, right? Like they make movies. I don't make movies. No. I write books. Yeah. And they make movies. So, to be fair though, they keep me in the loop in the sense of, here's who we've hired to write the screenplay, here's the direction we're going, here's who we're talking to in terms of talent and directors and who's on our list in terms of actors and stuff like that. But I could say, can I jump in? I object to that choice. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, you're cutting out. I'm sorry.
That's right.
You'll find, I've come to learn that if you're having a conference call with people in Los Angeles, they're always in their car, right? They're always in their car. And I don't even know if that's true, but they'll claim that they're in their car because if the conversation gets to a boring or a difficult point for them, they're like, I'm just going into the mountains, I'm going into the, and they cut out. So I've a few times been like, I don't know, I'm objected. Hello? Sorry, I went into the mountains, which I think is, a term of art. Never trust someone in California who says they've lost you because they've gone into the mountains.
There's a shooting.
On the prairie.
Those are, yes. I haven't even started talking about the agents yet.
Oh,
Yes.
You were saying that when people pitch you an idea and it's unfinished, and yes, the protagonist is really about themselves, there's some authors who claim that the third person is probably closest to them. So how close is David Ullman to you?
He's quite close to me. I think a lot of my, I'll say two things, I guess. One is that I think all of my protagonists are, I tend to write in the first person. They tend to be, some version of myself, but with some big difference, right? So I'm not, fortunately, depressive, and I don't suffer from the things that David suffers from. And I am able to connect with people, but I know what it's like, or I can imagine what his afflictions are like. So I have an ex-girlfriend, actually, who said something really smart, possibly the only thing. It was like, oh, you just said something smart. That's wildly unfair. But it was a good line.
You're being filmed.
Oh, I love you. No, I can't say I love you. She's my ex-girlfriend. I used to love you so much. She said, all of your protagonists are the man you would have been if you'd made a different decision. And I think she was right. It is almost like using, that would be maybe a therapeutic aspect of writing a novel, for me anyway, is that it's like, well, had I done that, that would have been who I would have become. And then you speculate on that life, the life not lived. The other thing I'll say about that is, again, something really smart that someone else said, not me. It was at a thing like this, a reading, and someone put up their hand, a woman at the question and answers, and she said, you know what reading your books are like? It's like driving a car at night, and the high beams are on. It's a twisty road. And when you're on a twisty road at night, you try to sort of see around the corner, because that's where, in the case of the novel, that's where the answer is. So you end up going faster because you want to see what's around the corner. Now it's getting a little bit dangerous, right? You're taking the corners too fast, but you're about to catch what's in front of you. And then you hear a knock coming from inside the car, coming from the trunk. And you pull over, and you get out, and you pop the trunk, and it's you in there. And she sat down, and I thought, I couldn't tell whether she was insane or, but I sort of, in thinking, I was like, that's exactly right. I don't think that's just true for me. I think that's generally, that's what all fiction does. You sort of, certainly suspense fiction in particular. You think the answer to the story is at the end. I'll skip to the end, and that'll be all the answers, right? Who did it? Does he survive? So you drive faster when really the answer is behind you. Really, the answer is the thing that's hidden in the trunk. Yes?
I really love the detail that really brings the story to life, in the sense that you'll never respond when you're writing. So how do you, when you're writing, produce that kind of detail that makes it so realistic you can almost smell the dirt on the book?
Well, part of that is really being in the scene and slowing down and really thinking about what would this feel like, or look like, or smell like. Just sort of getting those details right. And the other thing too, I think in terms of scariness, is I like to sort of import, or I'm proudest when I'm able to achieve an effect that I use the least amount of explosives, right? So in other words, instead of the doors burst open and the monster with sharp teeth came out, and it's making something, using the everyday and turning it a little bit so that it freaks you out. So I'll give you a quick example of the book, The Dam, that I finished is going in February. There's a scene in which I was like going around the house literally one day being like, what's something that you see every day that can be presented in a way you've never seen it before? And I was doing the laundry, and I thought, the dryer. The dryer is an inherently scary thing. Like, you put your clothes in the dryer and you walk away and you hear it, sometimes it's like, but the bump. What was that? Like, why would it arbitrarily in the middle of the cycle go, but the bottom? It's like there's something in there, right? So one of the scenes in the novel is the guy he's being haunted by his dead twin sister, who's not quite dead enough, and he's doing the laundry, and he walks away and he hears boom, and he goes back and he turns it off, walks away again, boom, 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 opens up the dryer, and I won't tell you what comes out, but something comes out of the dryer, right? But I'm really proud of that scene, not necessarily because of the turns of adventure, but because you take a household appliance and you just recast it, and in a way, my hope is that the people who will read that book will never kind of like doing the laundry will never be the same again, right? Which again has more impact than bringing in the big stuff. Sometimes the small stuff is more effective. Maybe you have time for, I know you got to go at 10 too, so maybe, is there one quickie? Last one? Yes?
Yes. When you finished writing the theme of immunologist, did you kind of stop and wonder if the book could kind of construe it as an affirmation of female Christian beliefs, like taking both spoil again, but elements of the end seem to do this? And I was wondering if it was intentional or...
Not for the point of view of kind of endorsing Christianity as such, but rather it is a journey of, it is certainly what I wanted it to be was a journey of belief. You know, a character who doesn't believe in any of this stuff comes to believe in it. And I wanted that journey to be the same for the reader, that no matter what you come to the book with, it's going to be a journey that will question what you believe. And so the ending, in a way, requires that investment of belief one way or the other. But no, it's not a Christian book. It's not propaganda. I'll stop there, but listen, thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks. And it's nice to see you all today. And please don't forget, books here on the table by the Secret Love Child of Stephen King and Alice Munro here for us. Nice to see you.